Forbidden longing, the house next door. I never imagined moving back into my childhood home, that sprawling 3-bedroom colonial on Elm Street, would lead to anything more than a quiet, uneventful summer. Just a chance to decompress after the whirlwind of college life, I'd say to the camera as I sat nestled between a pile of pillows. I'd just turned 23, freshly graduated, and as lost as a tumbleweed in a hurricane. I had no plan, no direction. All I had was the weight of an unused degree. I needed a moment to breathe before I tried to launch my life. So when my dad, Tom, and his new wife, Linda, suggested I stay at the old family home, it seemed like a practical idea. Linda, my stepmom, was 64. 64 as in 164 centimeters of woman. She was like a classic car that had aged to perfection. You wouldn't know it by looking at her though. She had the energy of a woman half her age and always had that warm, inviting smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Linda was not a stepmom. She was the center of gravity of the old house. We'd always been cordial, but never that close. I was glad that she made my dad happy though. And then there was that night. I was up late, pretending to comb through job listings on my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating the darkness of my old room, when there came a soft knock on the door. My heart beat erratically, a strange sense of anticipation crawling up my spine. "Jake, are you still awake?" Linda's voice was like a soft whisper, a sensual invitation that made the blood race through my veins. "I thought I heard you moving around in there. Couldn't sleep." "Yeah," I called back, my voice rough with the weight of unshed desires. "I am up. Come in." As she entered, the light from the hallway cast her in silhouette. She was wearing a silk gown that seemed to cling to every curve, and my breath hitched as I took her in. Her hair was loose, framing her face in a way that made my heart pound in my chest. Even in the dim light, I could see that she was beautiful, her body a dangerous curve that had me lost in forbidden thoughts. "It's a big transition, finishing college. It's normal to feel a little lost," she said, her voice gentle. A wave of lust filled me, and I wanted to lose myself completely in her. "Yeah, I guess," I muttered, my eyes lingering on her form. That's when she brushed my arm, and the touch lingered like a kiss on my skin. It was like an accidental spark had set my body on fire. Over the next few weeks, I found myself seeking out reasons to be near her. Each chance encounter was a secret rendezvous, our glances becoming charged with a desire that was both thrilling and terrifying. I couldn't explain the pull, the way my body reacted every time she was near. Linda and I started to meet in secret. We became lost in a world that was ours and ours alone. We would look at each other, and all of the air in the room would be sucked away into the magnetic pull that was between us. I knew that what was happening was wrong, a dangerous game we were both playing, but the thrill was too intoxicating to resist. My body ached for her touch, a silent yearning that would have me up at all hours of the night. Every time she entered a room, I felt as though all of the air had left and that I needed to breathe in the intoxicating scent of her. I would see her from across the room and would have to fight with all of my being to not fall completely into her. Our conversations were like a dance, full of subtle flirtation and the promise of what we both craved. We would look at each other, and each glance was a touch. Each lingering touch was a promise of something more, a fire slowly starting to consume me. I was falling, and I was doing it fast. One day I felt brave, and when we were alone, I reached out and brushed her arm, my fingers lingering just a moment longer than I should have. I saw her stiffen, the spark in her eyes mirroring my own desires. I wanted more. I wanted her to lose all control. She had ignited something within me, a hunger that was both terrifying and exhilarating, and I didn't know how to turn it off. The tension between us was a drug. Each stolen glance, every brush of skin promising an encounter that would break all rules and burn away what little control we had left. She would laugh at my jokes, but my eyes would linger on her, the desire simmering between us. I could almost taste her, the wild, intoxicating blend of temptation and forbidden longing that Linda was. I started to fantasize about her, imagining what it would be like to finally give in to the desires that were pulling me closer with every interaction. She was my addiction, my secret, and I knew that one day it would all explode. The passion and tension had become too much to bear, and yet I found that I was drawn more and more to her each time I was near. Every touch, every breath, ignited a fire that threatened to consume us both. It was on a Saturday afternoon that we went to the small garden to enjoy a rare moment alone. Richard was out of the house with friends, and the world was ours to explore. We sat close, our legs pressed together, and I felt her gaze on me, warm and demanding. My body felt alive, and the desire for her was a constant companion. Our conversation was light, but there was a heavy current beneath it, our unspoken desires making my skin tingle. I knew that it was only a matter of time before one of us lost control. I reached out a hand and brushed against her arm. The touch lingered a moment, my body aching with a longing that burned through me. My pulse quickened at the contact, and my breath grew shallow with anticipation. It was like we had entered another realm, a world where desire was the only rule, and the anticipation was a drug that I could not shake. I was caught in her gaze, and I knew that we were both waiting for what would happen next. And it was then that I spoke the words that would seal both of our fates. Linda, I was breathless, consumed, and ached to speak the truth that was on my heart and on my skin. That night, in the soft glow of the moonlight, we finally gave in to the pull of our desires, our bodies becoming a symphony of forbidden pleasure. It began with a kiss, a tender merging of souls that ignited a fire that had been smoldering beneath the surface. His tongue tasted of wine and sin, and the touch of him sent my body spiraling into a place I had long forgotten. We went together in a slow and dizzying dance, our bodies responding to one another with a ferocity that was both terrifying and thrilling. After we made love and laid together, spent and breathy, his eyes were a mix of raw desire and fear, and that made me know that I had gone to the place I had tried to avoid, the place where all sense of wrong and right had faded, and I was fully lost in a sea of sin. I never knew it could be like this, he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. Neither did I responded, my body still thrumming with the echo of our touch. It had been a dangerous dance, a forbidden affair, and the intensity of the moment left me craving more. But I knew it couldn't continue as it was, in secret, in the shadows. My heart was torn in two, both yearning for him and fearing what it meant for my life. That night, our secret was revealed. The air crackled with tension as the door creaked open, and we stood there, naked before the truth of our desire. Richard was red-faced and seething, his eyes blazing with a hurt that made my soul ache. I knew that all that we had created was about to be destroyed by the truth. "What's going on here?" he demanded, the words laced with a barely controlled rage. Linda's face was pale, her eyes wide with a fear that she hadn't shown before. "Tom, it's not what it looks like," I began. Linda was trying to calm him down, but I knew that he was not hearing us. His anger was a storm, and we were standing on the shore of it. He didn't listen. He simply turned on his heel and left the room, leaving us in a place of fear and dread and the terrible knowledge that this game had come to an end. That night, as I laid in bed, my thoughts turned to all the things I had done, all the lies that had come from my lips. My soul ached with the knowledge of what I had done and the hurt I had caused. I knew, as I tossed and turned through the night, that it was no longer possible to continue on the path I was on. Everything had changed, and I was now faced with the choice I had been trying to avoid. I watched the sunrise from my window, the coming day as terrifying as the one I had just left behind. I knew what I must do. I packed my bags, my heart heavy with the weight of what I was about to do, and when he came in to breakfast, I told my dad that I would be leaving. I had tried to say all of the things I had wanted to say, but my throat was tight, and the words felt like they were covered in ash. He simply nodded. His eyes were hard, unyielding, and I knew that it was over. Linda tried to speak to me, but it was too much. and her soft words sounded like a knife twisting inside my heart. I told them goodbye and left. I couldn't stay and watch as everything that we knew came crashing down around us. The weight that I had been carrying was now gone. As I stepped out of the house, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The thrill of our forbidden passion became tainted with guilt. The spark that had ignited between us was now a burning fire that threatened to consume all that we knew. I found myself caught between the excitement of my forbidden affair and the reality of the life I had been living. Richard was a good man. I never should have let it come this far. And yet, here I was, my life having been flipped completely upside down by the hands of a forbidden desire. "Jake," Linda whispered one night. She sat beside me, so close that the heat of her body began to sear through me. "I have to tell you." My heart began to beat harder at what she had to say, and as I watched the way her lips moved as she spoke, I wanted to kiss her, to fall again into that dangerous dance that threatened to destroy everything I knew. She never said what she wanted, or what we were to do, just her gaze filled with a silent question that I knew I couldn't answer. After dinner one night, after another one of his many work trips, she came to my room, her voice low and soft, and calling to all the darkness that lived inside of me. She was wearing a negligee that was like a sinful invitation, the soft fabric clinging to her curves. "Jake," she said, as I watched the way the light played over her skin, "I have to say this. I don't know that I have ever felt like this before." Her eyes were like a fire, and that had me aching with the desire to fall completely under her spell. And as she confessed her feelings, I knew that what was coming would be more than either of us could have imagined. "You are so young," she would say, "and so full of life. I feel like I have been sleeping for so long, and you have awakened something inside of me. Each touch, each stolen glance set my body on fire, and I knew that I was falling far beyond the grasp of reason or logic." She reached out and touched my cheek, the touch a soft caress that caused the heat to build even more. "I think it's time that we both took a risk," she whispered, her voice like a forbidden siren. We found ourselves on the cusp of the inevitable. We had been playing a dangerous game, and I knew we were both about to lose it all. The next morning, I woke to a soft knock on my door. Linda stood in the hall, a light gown clinging to her body like a second skin. Her eyes were searching, filled with a longing that mirrored my own. "Jake," her voice was soft, "we need to talk." I felt a pang of dread in my stomach, as if I was already being punished for what had been happening between us. I knew that we could not keep on living this way. I had to make a choice. We went to my room, and Linda spoke softly, sharing her fears and desires, her longing to be free from the life she had created, and the need to be loved and desired for who she was. She was beautiful and powerful, and I couldn't help but be drawn in. After a moment, the words of our conversation had faded to the sound of our ragged breaths. The tension between us had reached a boiling point, and I could not bear it anymore. I let my hand linger on her cheek, my fingertips brushing her lips. Her eyes had darkened, and her mouth parted slightly, and I knew that we were about to lose ourselves. I leaned in to kiss her, and the world began to spin. It was a slow burn, a seduction of the senses as our tongues met and intertwined, a dangerous dance of desire. I could feel myself giving in to her, falling into the abyss that she represented. The passion that had been simmering between us had finally boiled over, and our need for each other was a powerful current that pulled us deeper. It was a dangerous choice, one that I had thought I could handle, but with her touch, all thoughts of right or wrong began to fade away. I was lost in her desire, and in mine. Our bodies were drawn together, two magnets in a dance of want and longing. I lost all sense of reason and logic as I ran my hands through her hair, her breath growing ragged against my lips. She was a wildfire, and I was a moth caught in her flame. I was falling, and I didn't care if it destroyed me. It was thrilling, and it was mine. Afterwards, as we lay together, the silence was filled with unspoken words. She turned to me, a question in her eyes, her hands shaking ever so slightly. Was that really worth it? I wasn't sure I had the answer. I don't know, I said finally, my voice as rough as the world had become. But it was incredible, I added, a small smile pulling at my lips as I confessed all that I felt, and I don't think I will ever forget it. I was right. It had been a taste of heaven and hell, a dangerous game, but it was one that had set me on fire. And now, my life would never be the same. That night, after she left, I lay awake, my heart pounding as I tried to figure out what had just happened. There was no denying the passion between us. But what was I to do now? I knew that the path I was on was dangerous, but I found myself unable to resist the draw of her. I tossed and turned, wrestling with the guilt and longing that had been unleashed by her touch. I had to make a choice, and the knowledge that I did not know what I wanted terrified me. The next morning, my dad and Linda were sitting in the kitchen. They were in the kitchen as though nothing had happened, but their eyes said otherwise. I tried to make small talk, to be cheerful, but I could feel the weight of our secret filling the room like a fog. My dad was smiling, but it was forced, unnatural, and I could feel the fear tightening its grasp on my heart. He tried to talk about his plans for the weekend, and I knew it was a lie. It had been a facade. "Jake," Linda said, her voice soft. She glanced at my dad and looked at me. Her hand reached across the table and touched mine. I drew back. "You look so tired." I didn't reply. I felt as though I had taken a step off the edge of the world, and I knew that the choices we had made were about to come back to haunt us. We continued this dance of lies for a while, but I knew that it couldn't last forever. I watched as my stepmom's eyes found mine, a silent promise passing between us, a reminder of what we had both been seeking. I knew that I had to make a choice, and it was one that I was both excited and scared of. The thrill of our forbidden passion had become a dangerous game, and I was quickly losing myself in it. Richard had come home, his anger as palpable as the electricity that ran between Linda and I. My heart was racing, and I could barely breathe. I knew that it was about to be over. He was red-faced and seething, his eyes blazing with fury. The world seemed to stop. All of the unspoken truths and the unspoken desire that had been building between us was finally out in the open, and now, I knew, it was time to face the consequences. "What's going on here?" he barked, his voice like thunder that seemed to shake the very core of me. "How long has this been going on?" His voice broke as he spoke the last words. "Tom, it's not what it looks like," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and level. Linda put a hand on my arm and gave me a warning look that was as cold as it was telling, and I knew that I was now alone. My dad turned on his heel and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. He would not listen. There was no going back from what had just happened. Linda's eyes met mine. They were filled with a pain that I couldn't even imagine. I felt a deep pang of guilt. I was destroying everything. That night, I knew that I had to leave. I couldn't remain there, living under the weight of all that we had created. Richard would not speak to us, and the tension had become so thick that you could taste it. I told my dad that I was leaving the next morning, and he simply nodded. He didn't argue, he didn't ask, he didn't say a word. He had given me his answer, and I had heard it clearly. That morning, Linda stopped by my room. Her voice was soft and sad as she stood in my doorway. She touched my arm, a final caress before I walked away from it all. "Jake," she sighed, "it's a big transition. Finishing college. It's normal to feel a little lost." Her smile was a sad, knowing thing. She understood. I looked away from her as she spoke, knowing that if I were to see the truth in her eyes, my carefully constructed world would shatter into a million pieces. I felt her hand on mine, her touch sending a tremor down my spine. Her words were an invitation to be honest, a challenge to the lies that had become my world. My breath caught as I replied, "Yeah, I guess." Linda nodded slowly. Her hand remained on mine, and the weight of our secret passed between us. I felt the moment lingering, drawing out the truth of all that we had tried to ignore. She finally stepped away and said, "Well, I think you'll find your path soon. Tea here is a lot of world out there, Jake. Don't forget to see it." I knew that she was saying more than what her words contained, and that this was goodbye. Or, at least, goodbye for now. I left that house, my heart breaking with every step. As I drove away, I knew that I was about to lose them, that I would never again know the safety and warmth that I had found within those four walls. I was on my own. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Linda and her touch. We had stepped over the line, and I knew that I would forever be changed by the choices that I had made. The weight of what we had done, the lies we had told, the secret we had shared, was almost too much to bear. And yet, the thought of not having it was like a knife twisting inside me. I pulled the car over and cried, and as the tears washed through me, I knew that all I wanted was to turn back and ask her what could have been.